Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot onto the creaking wooden boards of a drafty medieval hovel, where your bed is a sack of straw possibly shared with a goat and definitely shared with a few dozen fleas. Your eyelids flutter open to a dim gray light leaking through wooden slats, and immediately your nostrils are assaulted by the fragrance of damp earth, fermented body odor, and something else you can't quite name. Possibly last night's turnip stew, or possibly something decomposing under the floorboards. Either way, you're awake now. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time you're watching. I'd love to know who's listening from which corner of the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit up and your back already aches. The bedding, if you can call it that, feels like sleeping on dried hay topped with old potatoes. The air is cold, even in summer, because there's no insulation in these timber walls. Your clothes are damp from your own sweat and last night's rain that leaked through the roof. Your shirt is made of coarse, unbleached wool. Imagine wrapping yourself in a wet cat. Scratchy. Pungent. Alive? No, just a family of lice moving in. Welcome to a peasant's start to the day in the 1300s. Now, maybe you're wondering, why not just change into something clean? Great idea. Except that you only own one set of clothing. 2, if you're wildly lucky, or you stole a shroud off a corpse. Laundry is a rare affair, often involving freezing streams, crushed soapwort plants, and enough elbow grease to remove the top layer of your skin. People hang clothes out to dry, yes, but that doesn't mean they're clean, just aired out. Lice, by the way, don't mind fresh air. Your mother, if she's still alive and not taken by childbed fever or a coughing fit, is already up boiling a pot of gruel made of oats and water and maybe a piece of onion if it's a festive day. The fire has to be stoked carefully. It's not easy when you're starting with damp twigs and a hearth filled with ash. The hearth, by the way, is the warmest part of the house and also the filthiest. Ash, soot, and rat droppings are standard toppings on your breakfast. If you're lucky, you might even have a dollop of animal fat to add flavor. That's breakfast, by the way. Gruel, and possibly some stale bread you soften with spit. There's no coffee, no orange juice, and absolutely no eggs unless your hen survived the night and wasn't stolen by the neighbor or eaten by a fox. Protein is a seasonal dream. Even the act of getting up is treacherous. The floor is dirt, not metaphorically. Actual dirt, often strewn with hay to absorb waste. Human and animal alike, you step on something squishy. It could be a turnip or a rat. You choose not to investigate. And what's that creaking from the corner? The family pig. Yes, it lives inside. It's too valuable to risk leaving it outside where wolves or hungrier peasants might take it. The pig sometimes doubles as a bed warmer, and it always triples as a toilet. Most peasant homes were one room, sometimes with a loft. A family of 5, 6, maybe even 10, shares this space with the chickens, the goat, and possibly an elderly grandparent who mutters curses in the night. There's no privacy. No doors. Just blankets hung for modesty, and even those are optional. Historians still argue whether the medieval peasant home was a functional communal space or an unhygienic death trap. Probably both. Let's not forget the smell. There's a myth that medieval people didn't notice bad smells because they were used to them. That's only half true. They noticed. Trust me, they just didn't have the time, water, or social infrastructure to do much about it. Soap existed, yes, a luxurious mixture of animal fat and ash, sometimes scented with herbs if you were upper class. You're lucky to rub yourself with a damp cloth once a week. There's no mirror in the house, unless a metal pan counts. You won't like what you see anyway. Pale skin, chapped lips, and hair that feels like tangled rope. Children have swollen bellies, not from wealth, but malnutrition. Your gums might be bleeding already. Scurvy is just around the corner, waving cheerfully from the sidelines. And yet, this is a decent day. It's not raining. No one's died overnight. The sheriff hasn't come to collect taxes and chickens or beatings. The local lord hasn't demanded extra grain for his hunting feast. Your neighbor's wife hasn't accused you of witchcraft yet. Quirky fact: some medieval folks believed that sleeping too long made you lazy and sinful. You were expected to rise before dawn, which is great, because no one wants to be labeled as having sloth, one of the 7 deadly sins. You just woke up and you're already sinning. So, you step out into the misty dawn, stretch your aching limbs, and get ready for a hard day of survival. Only 23 hours to go. Let's say nature calls. Not just a polite knock either, a medieval emergency. You're groggy, barefoot, and now faced with one of the most intimate terrors of the Middle Ages: going to the toilet. Now, before you start picturing a rustic wooden outhouse with birds chirping and some hay for privacy, let me gently shatter that illusion. You live in a tiny one-room hovel with your entire extended family, and you do not have a bathroom. You have a chamber pot, which sounds fancy, but it's really just a bucket. A bucket with dreams. If you're feeling posh, it might be ceramic. If you're unlucky, it's wooden and starting to rot at the bottom. And when you're done, that bucket's contents go out the window or into the street, literally. You open the shutter and toss the night's worth of family deposits into the muddy path outside your door, a path everyone uses, including barefoot children, including you. There's no toilet paper, not even leaves. Leaves would be a luxury. You might have moss if it's spring, or old straw, or a frayed cloth shared by the whole household and rinsed every full moon. The streets, unsurprisingly, reek. This isn't just your household's contribution after all. Every home does the same. Rain helps a little, but also floods the waste back toward your doorstep. In the summer heat, it becomes an assault on your nostrils, one that lingers in your hair and clothes. Now imagine living in a city. Urban medieval life comes with even more charming details. Take London. By the 14th century, it had public latrines known as privies, often located over rivers or open cesspits. When those got full, and they did, they either overflowed or had to be shoveled out by hand. By whom? Gong farmers. Yes, that was an actual job title. Gong farmers would come at night, dig through excrement, and carry it away in barrels. You get paid well for this, relatively speaking. But your lifespan? Very short. The methane alone could drop you. Historians still argue whether sanitation was actually worse in dense cities or if rural areas were equally dangerous due to runoff and proximity to livestock. What we do know is that either way, you're ankle-deep in trouble. Quirky fact: some monasteries had surprisingly advanced plumbing systems. A few even had rudimentary flush toilets, tiny stone channels that carried waste away with diverted water from nearby streams. But you, dear listener, are not in a monastery. You are squatting in a cold corner of your home and hoping no one walks in mid-business. Again, one room. Zero privacy. Some larger homes had garderobes, vertical shafts built into castle or manor walls. You'd sit on a stone ledge with a hole in it, and gravity would do the rest. Sometimes these led to moats, and sometimes not. But let's be honest, even if you had a castle garderobe, it's not much better. Cold, breezy, and often shared by the entire household staff. And yes, rats climbed up, and heaven help you if you're constipated or have food poisoning. There are no safe, private, or hygienic spaces to deal with either scenario. You do your best, make a sign of the cross, and carry on. The psychological toll of constantly living in and around waste isn't often discussed, but imagine the stress of always worrying about smell, disease, and vermin. Not just a passing annoyance. This was daily life. You probably don't even realize you're sick until it's too late. Let's talk about the cesspits. In some towns, entire alleys were built above open pits with planks over top, so you could theoretically walk without falling in. The key word being theoretically. There are recorded cases of people, usually intoxicated ones, falling into cesspits and drowning. That's right, death by excrement. Now you might ask, why didn't they build better systems? Simple answer: they didn't understand the science. Germ theory didn't exist yet. Smells were thought to be the problem, not the bacteria themselves. The miasma theory dominated. People believed bad smells caused illness, which, to be fair, is almost right. They were very close. But unfortunately, the solution to foul air wasn't sanitation. It was burning incense or wearing a pouch of herbs around your neck and hoping the stench of lavender overpowered the scent of sewage. And if you were a noble? Well, yes, things were better, sort of. Nobles had servants to empty their chamber pots, but the chamber pots still existed, just made of pewter instead of clay. You'd find entire castle corridors known as draft passages that funneled the waste downward, sometimes even through the walls, meaning the castle itself constantly stank from the inside out. So much for prestige. And no, there are no bathrooms in churches. If you had an emergency during Mass, you'd either hold it, find a wall outside, or quietly excuse yourself and hope no one noticed. Priests, too, had to deal with this. There's even a famous complaint from the 14th century where monks in a remote abbey requested help because the pit under their latrines had filled up with extraordinary swiftness. It had only taken 80 years. By the time you've done your business, emptied the pot, carefully, and stepped back inside, the smell of porridge seems almost delightful. Almost. You wash your hands with cold water from a bucket, if you're lucky, and you don't dry them. There are no towels, and rags are too precious to waste on something as luxurious as dry hands. You haven't even started your day, and already you've faced an obstacle course of bodily functions, poor infrastructure, and mild existential despair. But hey, at least you didn't fall in the cesspit. Your stomach rumbles, not because you skipped breakfast, but because what you did eat, thin oat gruel and crusty bread, has made your stomach consider mutiny. You eye the remaining slab of bread, which could also be used as a medieval discus or a blunt weapon. This is trencher bread, thick, hard, and stale by design. The outer crust was so tough it could survive sieges. The inside, slightly softer, if you're lucky enough to get the middle. But usually you get the edges, and you chew them like a desperate squirrel. Dental hygiene in the Middle Ages was, well, spiritual. People didn't brush their teeth. Toothpicks were common, usually slivers of wood or bird bones. A few might rinse their mouths with herbs or vinegar, but toothpaste as you know it didn't exist. There were recipes involving crushed salt, burnt rosemary, or even powdered fish bones. Some of these might work. Most just gave you splinters in your gums. So how are your teeth doing? Not well. By your mid-20s, you're probably missing a few molars. Bread often contained grit, literal stone particles, because the flour was ground between stones that shed dust. So, every time you eat, it's like a gentle dental sandblasting. Historians examining medieval skeletons consistently find worn-down enamel and abscessed jaws. And infections? Oh, they love your gums. With no antibiotics, a single rotten tooth could kill you, slowly and painfully. Still, it's time for a snack. Maybe a hunk of cheese, if you have a cow or goat and it hasn't died of worms. Or possibly some dried peas, boiled into a thick paste. Fruits are seasonal luxuries. Vegetables, often boiled beyond recognition. Anything raw might be viewed with suspicion. Some even believed raw fruit caused illness, especially melons. Because, juicy things are suspicious. If you're lucky, you might have ale to wash it all down. Yes, even at breakfast, water is unsafe, often teeming with bacteria, leeches, and mystery flavors. Ale, being boiled and fermented, is safer, even for kids. It's weak, sure, but it gets the job done, and you'll need it for what comes next. You're starting to get the hang of medieval life, right? Well, let's say you want something sweeter, just to treat yourself. Forget chocolate, not invented yet in Europe. Sugar? Technically available, but outrageously expensive. Honey is your best bet if you're willing to brave a beehive or trade with someone who did. Most peasants rarely tasted sweetness. Your tongue basically lives in the land of bland, with occasional pilgrimages to Salttown. Quirky tidbit? There was a medieval belief that pears were especially dangerous. Some people thought they cooled the stomach too much and could cause death. So if someone offers you a pear, beware. It might be a snack or an assassination attempt. Historians still argue whether medieval diets were healthier than modern ones, especially among peasants. On paper, you might be getting more fiber and fewer processed fats. But when food is inconsistent, unbalanced, and laced with sand, the long-term effects are grim. Malnutrition was rampant, especially in winter. Vitamin deficiencies led to brittle bones, blindness, and diseases like scurvy. Some folks didn't even have names for what was killing them, just vague terms like wasting sickness or bloody flux. Let's not forget spoiled food. With no refrigeration, meat goes bad quickly. Salted or smoked preservation helps, but even then, it's a gamble. You sniff your meal and hope it won't fight back. One common issue? Ergot, a fungus that grew on rye bread. It caused hallucinations, convulsions, and sometimes death. Entire villages may have danced themselves into madness because of it. So yes, that last slice of bread might be trying to kill you. And yet, you eat it anyway, because there is no backup, no fridge, no snack drawer, no Uber Eats bringing you a roasted chicken leg with a smile. Hunger in the Middle Ages wasn't an annoyance. It was a constant, looming presence. A bad harvest meant not, lettuce is expensive this year. It meant starvation, sometimes by the hundreds. Your fingers are cracked, nails dirty, and there's flour under your skin from pounding grain on a millstone earlier. That was part of your morning chore. It's not romantic. It's not rustic. It's your one chance to not die before sundown. And just when you think you've caught a break, the village bell rings, or the local Lord Steward appears, demanding grain, labor, or both. Your breakfast has barely digested, and now it's time to pay rent in wheat and broken dreams. You sigh, take one last bite of hard cheese, and try to ignore the sound of something scratching in the thatch roof. Might be rats, might be your imagination. In this world, you hope it's rats. You decide to stretch your legs, maybe take a walk. Fresh air sounds good, right? Well, brace yourself, because stepping outside in a medieval village is less pleasant stroll and more disease obstacle course. You tug on your hood, step through the creaky doorway, and are immediately greeted by a thick waft of smoke, wet dog, and composting cabbage. The narrow dirt paths are slick with mud, or what you hope is mud, and lined with the joyful chaos of pigs rooting through garbage, dogs fighting over bones, and children hurling turnips at each other. One of them is naked. You pretend not to notice. But let's talk about your real enemy: disease. It's everywhere. The water in the nearby stream carries runoff from homes, farms, and the town latrine. You pass by a tannery where animal skins rot in open vats of urine and lime. That smell? Pungent doesn't cover it. You walk faster, holding your breath, which only lasts until you're ambushed by a coughing neighbor hawking something onto the ground beside you. No one knows why people get sick. Maybe it's sin. Maybe it's spirits. Maybe you forgot to say your morning prayer correctly. Bad air is blamed for most of it. Miasma theory still reigns. You wear a sprig of mint in your collar just in case. Others hang dried flowers by the door or burn animal dung to purify the air, which is ironic. Historians still argue whether medieval people had some grasp of contagion. They definitely noticed that illness spread from person to person, but without germ theory, they didn't understand how. Plagues came and went like curses. The Black Death, for instance, wiped out as much as half of Europe in the 14th century, and nobody agreed on what caused it. Was it divine punishment? Was it the Jews poisoning wells? Was it the alignment of the planets? Quirky fact? During outbreaks, some folks carried pomanders, tiny metal balls filled with sweet-smelling herbs. Others wore masks with beaks filled with spices, the early precursor to plague doctor outfits. You don't have that. You've got a damp sleeve and blind optimism. As you walk, You see livestock everywhere. Cows with ribs showing, chickens roosting on roofs, a goose hissing at an elderly man who throws a turnip at it. Animals and humans live side by side, often in the same buildings. That might sound quaint, until you realize what else comes with them. Fleas, lice, mites, and ticks. Oh, and rats. So many rats. You pass a small crowd gathered around a man with pustules on his face. He's babbling about demons in his gut and trying to sell eel oil as a cure. No one questions him. Some even buy it. After all, what else is there? Physicians are rare, expensive, and not particularly helpful. Their cures often include bleeding, purging, or applying crushed beetles, or all three. You hear someone mention the sweating sickness and instinctively edge away. No one knows where it came from. No one knows why it kills so quickly. And no one will remember your name if you're dead by nightfall. The church looms at the center of town, but even its sanctuary isn't immune. Priests catch diseases too. You might attend a funeral there today. Someone's baby, or grandmother, or apprentice. Death is a part of the daily rhythm. People carry it lightly. They have to. Still, you push on. You cross a small bridge over the stream, eyeing the water. It's got a film on top. A few women are washing clothes downstream, beating them with sticks and muttering. You hope your drinking bucket didn't come from upstream of this, but you suspect it did. A dog follows you. It's missing an ear and has eyes that don't match. You name him scabies in your mind and keep your distance. Despite everything, the village is buzzing. A market day, maybe. Stalls with root vegetables, hard cheeses, maybe even smoked fish. Coins clink, chickens squawk, and a man with no shoes tries to trade a spoon for onions. You see someone hawking amulets against bad humors, shiny bits of brass and carved bone. You don't laugh. You're considering buying one. And then you spot something worse than disease. The Lord's tax collector. His fine boots avoid the mud while his assistant points at barrels of grain. If you can't pay, you pay another way. Labor, livestock, or humiliation. You duck behind a stall and pretend to admire a turnip. Medieval walking isn't leisurely. Every step is a risk. The terrain is uneven, the animals are unpredictable, and the people might be contagious. But you've made it through the morning. You head home through the back alley, passing a woman dumping slop into a ditch. She nods at you, then coughs into her apron. You try not to think about it. You reach your front door and suddenly realize you've tracked mud, and possibly worse, all the way in. You've walked maybe a mile. You're exhausted. Your boots, if you even have any, are soaked, and your lungs feel like they've inhaled a vat of sour cabbage. But congratulations, you survive the walk. Barely. You sit down for just a moment, resting your weary legs and trying to ignore the faint sensation that something is crawling inside your boot. But leisure isn't a recognized medieval concept unless you're rich, dying, or in church. And you're not rich, not yet dying, and it's definitely not Sunday. Time to go to work. Medieval employment isn't about fulfillment or career growth. It's about survival. If you're lucky, you're a tenant farmer, tilling a small patch of land in exchange for endless taxes and backbreaking obligation. If you're unlucky, you're landless, hungry, and one bad decision away from selling your only shoes for turnips. Today, You're off to your task as a tanner's assistant, and you probably regret it already. Your job? Turn raw animal hides into leather. How? First, you soak the hides in urine to loosen hair and fat. Yes, urine. Collected from chamber pots, public piddle barrels, and the occasional generous neighbor. Once the hides are soaked, you scrape them with a dull knife while fighting the urge to vomit. Then, you soak them again, this time in a paste made from animal brains or, brace yourself, rotting pigeon dung. The smell could knock out a rhino, and you're just standing in it all day. You're not alone. Other jobs are equally grim. Gong farmers we met earlier dig out latrines at night. Fullers stomp in tubs of urine to whiten cloth. Executioners handle body parts. Treadwheel operators walk in giant wooden hamster wheels to hoist buckets of stone in construction sites. And let's not forget the shepherds who sleep in fields, fending off wolves with nothing but a stick and existential dread. Even craftspeople like blacksmiths or coopers suffer from constant burns, smashed fingers, and lung issues from breathing in soot and sawdust. There's no protective gear, no unions, no sick days, just your hands, your back, and the knowledge that if you collapse, someone else is already waiting to take your place. Historians still argue whether these jobs were considered noble acts of contribution or just tolerated necessities in the village hierarchy. One thing's for sure, no one's doing them for fun. Quirky fact: medieval bakers were sometimes legally required to make bread of consistent weight. To avoid being accused of shorting customers, they added an extra roll. A baker's dozen. So yes, the phrase comes from a time when giving someone too little bread could get you thrown in the stocks. You pause briefly to watch the local blacksmith hammer away at a horseshoe. Sparks fly. He looks powerful and stoic, until you notice his singed eyebrows and the open sore on his arm that's definitely infected. Still want that job? You consider a religious profession. Monks seem clean and contemplative, but behind those monastery walls is a life of silence, grueling early mornings, and surprise beatings from superiors for failing to memorize Latin verses. And nuns? Equally tough. The romance ends when you're ankle-deep in candle wax or tasked with copying scripture until your hand cramps into a permanent claw. And if you're a woman, your options narrow considerably. You might work as a maid in a noble household, scrubbing chamber pots and praying the lord of the house doesn't take an interest in you. Or you might brew ale, which sounds fun until you realize you'll be blamed if anyone gets sick from it. Or maybe you're a midwife, ushering new life into the world with no tools, little knowledge, and a high chance of losing both mother and child. Or maybe, just maybe, you're unemployed. In which case, your career involves begging, stealing, or wandering from town to town hoping someone dies and you can take their job. Vagrants are punished, often jailed, sometimes branded. Still romanticizing the past? The day wears on. You sweat through your only tunic, your hands reek of the tanning vat, and your stomach growls for something that isn't boiled barley. A neighbor passes, eyes you up and down, and mumbles about your haughty posture. A surefire sign of demonic possession, apparently. You smile weakly and bend over more. Back at your hut, you collapse onto a stool that wobbles from woodworm. Every muscle screams. Your nails are black. Your skin feels like it's aged 5 years in 5 hours. And guess what? There's still firewood to chop, animals to feed, and the tax collector is expected back next week with a ledger and soldiers. But for now, you rest. The only perk of medieval work? No emails. You stink. There's no polite way to say it. After a full day of laboring in tanner's goo, brushing up against livestock, and marinating in your own sweat under 3 layers of scratchy wool, you smell like someone boiled a shoe in cabbage water. Which is fitting, because now it's time to talk about one of the medieval period's most paradoxical topics: cleanliness. You're filthy. You know it. Everyone knows it. But bathing? That's not something most people do often, if at all. The medieval world had an incredibly complicated relationship with cleanliness. On one hand, water was everywhere. On the other, bathing had slowly gained a sketchy reputation. In some areas and times, public bathhouses were popular and widely used. In others, particularly after plague outbreaks and during periods of heavy religious reform, they were viewed as decadent, sinful, or even flat-out dangerous. In your case, you don't have a bathhouse. You have a cold wooden tub stored in the corner of your hut, filled once a month, maybe, with water from the nearest stream. The entire family uses the same water. You go last. It is not warm. It is not clean. And it's definitely not scented. Soap? If you're lucky, you've got a greasy lump made from animal fat and lye. It burns your skin and stings any cuts, which means you scream a little every time you use it. Still, it's better than the alternative, which is washing with sand, vinegar, or just rubbing yourself down with a rough cloth and hoping for the best. Quirky fact: some medieval folks believed that washing too often weakened the body and opened your pores to sickness. Physicians warned against frequent bathing because it destabilized the humors, so even when people had access to warm water, they were told not to use it too much. Congratulations. Your doctor just prescribed stink. Historians still argue whether the average peasant was dirtier than their ancient Roman predecessors. The Romans loved their baths. But by the Middle Ages, attitudes had shifted. After the fall of Rome, many public bathhouses fell into ruin or were repurposed. By the 14th century, especially after repeated outbreaks of the Black Death, bathhouses in many regions were shuttered. Too many naked people gathered together. Must be sinful. Or worse, unsanitary. Still, some places maintained their own traditions. In Islamic Spain, bathhouses, hammams, were common and celebrated. In Scandinavia, sweat lodges and saunas were a routine part of life. But in your northern village, you bathe once every few weeks if no one steals the water first. And what about laundry? You'd love to wash your tunic, except you'd have to be naked, and someone might steal it while it dries. So you wait until it's absolutely unbearable, then scrub it in a cold stream with a rock and your tears. It dries stiff, smells vaguely of moss, and has lice in it again by morning. Body odor isn't just tolerated, it's expected. You know your neighbors by smell. You might even navigate crowds using scent as sonar. Is that Marjorie? Smells like onions and wet wool. Yes, that's her. Even nobility aren't much cleaner. Rich folks might have more water, but they also have more layers to trap sweat. Under all that velvet and brocade is a soup of old cologne, mildew, and despair. Perfume becomes a substitute for bathing, People powder their wigs, dab rosewater on their sleeves, and carry fragrant herbs in little pouches called pomanders. But the scent of death is hard to mask, especially in the summer. Disease thrives in filth, and your village is full of both. Every scrape is a risk. You've got a blister on your heel that's starting to ooze. There's no antibiotic cream. The local healer gives you a poultice of butter and herbs. You nod politely, but the pain spreads anyway. You consider cleaning the wound, but the water is suspicious. Bathing in it might do more harm than good. So you limp through the evening, hoping your immune system can handle medieval realism. As dusk falls, you light a rushlight, a cheap medieval candle made by soaking reeds in fat. It gives off a faint glow and a strong smell of bacon. Not ideal for ambiance, but it keeps the bugs away. Kind of. You peel off your clothes. Your skin is pale where the sun never touches, and red where your tunic has rubbed it raw. You itch everywhere. Bedtime is approaching, and you know what that means. Lying down in the same grime, on the same mat, surrounded by the same smells. You consider bathing, just briefly, but the thought of fetching cold water in the dark, heating it on a smoky hearth, and scrubbing yourself with lye again? Nah. You decide to wash tomorrow. Probably. Maybe. If it rains, and just before you sleep, you scratch your shoulder and flick off something that was definitely alive. Sweet dreams. Darkness settles over your little village like a heavy wool blanket. Scratchy, musty, and filled with unsettling noises. The sun's gone, the fire's low, and shadows stretch long across your single-room hut. You might think this is the time to wind down, maybe whisper a few prayers, and tuck into a nice medieval sleep. But here's the thing. Nighttime in the Middle Ages isn't peaceful. It's terrifying. Your evening begins with prayers, not optional. You recite them aloud, quiet enough to be respectful, loud enough for your neighbors to hear. You don't want anyone thinking you've invited demons in by accident. Because in the medieval world, the night isn't just when the sun goes away. It's when they come out. Spirits, witches, the devil himself. People believed darkness was full of creatures that slinked through cracks and whispered in your ear while you slept. There are no electric lights, no glow from your phone, just a flickering rushlight and maybe the embers of the hearth. Shadows move strangely. The walls groan, and you are very aware that your door is just a piece of wood held closed with a simple latch. You push a stool against it, just in case. Let's talk about religion, shall we? Medieval life revolves around it. Every illness is a punishment. Every bad harvest a divine reprimand. Saints and relics are real sources of power. You've got a little wooden cross near your bedding, and maybe a fragment of cloth that supposedly touched a holy man. You keep it close because you've heard stories of the devil pulling people from their sleep if they weren't properly protected. Quirky fact: some folks believe that elves or fairies could cause nighttime paralysis, what we'd now call sleep apnea, or night terrors. The elf shot theory blamed invisible spirits for everything from stiff limbs to mysterious bruises. In Iceland, some people still nail protective runes over their doors. You might wish you had one now. Historians still argue whether the average medieval person genuinely believed in demons or just said they did out of habit and fear. But when you live in a world where science doesn't explain much and superstition explains everything. You believe, or at least pretend to, very convincingly. You curl under your blanket, straw stuffed into a linen sack, which crinkles and smells like every meal you've ever had. Beside you, someone snores, loudly. On the other side of the room, the pig shifts in its pen. A rat scuttles under the table. You pull the blanket over your head, which helps a little. There's no glass in the windows, just wooden shutters. So the wind gets in. So does the cold. And the sounds. Owls, dogs. Sometimes screams, usually foxes or maybe a drunk neighbor. But once in a while, something worse. Bandits, perhaps. Or that woman who claims she speaks to dead people. Sleep isn't a single peaceful stretch. Most medieval people followed segmented sleep. You doze off after dusk, wake in the middle of the night for a bit, maybe to stoke the fire, pray, or even visit a neighbor, and then go back for a second sleep until dawn. You're not sure which part you're in now, but you're very awake, very cold, and very convinced you heard something thump outside the wall. You hold your breath. Silence. Then you hear it again. A soft rustle. Maybe a hedgehog. Maybe something else. You think about going outside to check, but remember what happened to that one villager who went out at night and was never seen again. Probably wolves, maybe witches. No one's quite sure. Speaking of witches, this century is thick with suspicion. Women who live alone, know too much about herbs, or have a strong opinion, are automatically suspect. You remember a girl named Anwin who had an extra finger and laughed too loud. She disappeared one autumn. No one talks about it. You whisper another prayer. It doesn't help, let's be clear. Even your dreams aren't restful. Without understanding of the subconscious, dreams are often seen as divine messages or demonic visions. You dream about falling, or fire, or a faceless figure in a robe. When you wake up, you're not rested. You're more tired than when you fell asleep. Your body aches from the hard floor. Your shoulder's been poked by a bit of straw all night, and you're certain something bit your ankle. You'd look, but you can't be bothered to relight the rushlight. It's almost morning anyway, and you've just managed to drift off into a shallow doze when, bam! A rooster shrieks. A neighbor's cartwheel breaks. The baby 2 houses down starts wailing. Nighttime is over. Not that it felt like it ever really began. You sit up slowly. Your mouth tastes like old peas and regret. Your tunic is damp from sweat or dew, or possibly pig breath. You stretch, pop your back, and shuffle to the door. There's no sense of starting fresh here. You're just continuing the same long stretch of survival. Yesterday was hard. Today might be harder. Tomorrow, who knows? But at least you didn't get dragged off by a spirit. That's something. Morning light creeps in reluctantly, slanting through the gaps in your wooden shutters and illuminating the fine, floating dust that never quite settles. You rub the sleep from your eyes, or try to. One is gummed shut. Probably nothing. Probably. You sit up, stretch, and wince. Your entire body aches, but it's time to face the day again. And today, it's market day. That might sound exciting. A break from the routine, a bustling hub of medieval life. And it is, if you enjoy crowds, shouting, pickpockets, the stench of old fish, and the occasional public execution. You make your way to the town square, pushing through muddy paths lined with vendors calling out their wares. Eels, fresh eels, one man shouts, despite the smell suggesting otherwise. There's a basket of turnips that look more like small, angry rocks. A woman tries to sell you a bundle of goose feathers, promising they ward off the bloody flux. You're not sure what the bloody flux is, but you definitely want to ward it off. Then the crowd shifts, parting just enough to reveal a wooden platform in the center of the square. On it stands a man in shackles, head and hands locked in the stocks, his face already smeared with mud and vegetable remnants. Two children are arguing over whose turn it is to throw the next tomato. You look away, but not before you notice the sign hung around his neck. Stole bread. This, dear listener, is justice. In the Middle Ages, punishments were public, painful, and deeply theatrical. The idea wasn't just to punish the criminal, it was to make everyone watch, so they'd think twice about stealing an onion or talking back to a reeve. Theft might get you whipped, branded, or put in the stocks. Accused of lying? You might be forced to carry a red-hot iron bar to prove your honesty. Can't read Latin? Sorry, you're out of luck with the legal system, or the Bible. Historians still argue whether medieval justice was mostly performative or genuinely effective at maintaining social order. What's certain is that it was often brutal, deeply superstitious, and disproportionately applied. Rich folks, fines; poor folks, fingers. Quirky fact: there was once a law in 13th century England that banned people from wearing pointy shoes that were too long. Why? Because they were seen as proud and sinful. If your shoes curled too much, you might face penance, fashion police, but with actual punishment. And then there's trial by ordeal. Did someone accuse you of stealing a sheep? No problem. Just plunge your hand into boiling water. If the skin heals nicely within 3 days, you're innocent. If it festers, you're guilty. Either way, good luck using that hand again. You linger near the edge of the crowd as the local executioner, a burly man with a permanent scowl and a nose like a broken squash, prepares the stocks for another guest. This time, it's a woman accused of gossiping too loudly. Her punishment? The scold's bridle, a metal cage fitted over her head, with a little spike that rests on her tongue to stop her talking. Effective, also horrifying. And then come the more serious crimes. If you're caught committing treason, sorcery, or even just seriously angering a noble, things get worse. Much worse. Hanging, burning, drowning, being drawn and quartered. Yes, that means exactly what it sounds like. And these aren't done in secret. They're spectacles. Entire towns gather for them, bringing snacks. Children sit on shoulders. It's entertainment, morbid, messy, and considered good for public morality. You shudder and step away, not because you're soft, but because you know, deep down, that it wouldn't take much to end up in those stocks yourself. Maybe a missing chicken, a bad look, an unlucky neighbor with a grudge. You pass a young boy crying as a bailiff drags away his family's only goat. Payment for unpaid taxes. The mother pleads, but no one steps in. You keep walking. What can you do? Even your thoughts aren't entirely safe. Accused of heresy? blasphemy, witchcraft. Best hope you've got influential friends or a saint's relic to plead your case. Otherwise, a very uncomfortable trial or spontaneous drowning awaits. Because as the logic goes, if you float, you're a witch. If you sink, you're innocent. Problem solved, right? There's a brief moment of levity when a juggler tumbles into the square, flipping knives and cracking jokes. People laugh. Someone throws him a coin. For a second, you remember that joy exists. It's brief, but it's something. Still, the square is heavy with tension. Not all punishments involve physical harm. Shame is a powerful tool. Public shaming, dunce caps, and signs detailing your crimes were common. One particularly odd punishment: wearing animal skins inside out and being paraded around town while people threw mud at you. Why? Because sometimes humiliation works better than iron. You head home with a turnip and a piece of dry bread. You'd try to forget the faces you saw today, some ashamed, some resigned, and one that looked far too much like your cousin. He owed someone chickens. You'll ask about it later. As the town square fades behind you, the faint echoes of laughter and groans still linger. You realize something important about medieval life. It isn't just harsh, it's public. Everything is seen, everything is judged, and if you mess up, the whole town gets front row seats to your downfall. So keep your head down, smile when spoken to, and for heaven's sake, don't gossip. You're finally back home, if you can call it that. A sagging timber hut with more holes than a monk's robe. Your feet are sore. Your stomach is growling again, and your brain is still buzzing from the spectacle of the town square. But there's no time to unwind. Night's coming, and in the medieval world, night doesn't just mean rest. It means survival. First, you double-check the door latch. Then you look at the tiny window shutter and make sure it's firmly closed. The wind has picked up, and with it comes the howls. Some are wolves, some are men, and some, you're not quite sure. But what you do know is that after sundown, you're on your own. No patrols, no torches, no help. The town walls, if your village even has them, are symbolic at best. It's now you versus everything that crawls, bites, steals, or curses. You fumble in the dim light to gather firewood. Your pile is low, again. You should have collected more earlier, but between the tanner's work, the crowd, and trying not to get arrested for loitering near the goose vendor, you forgot. So now, your hearth fire sputters, casting weak shadows and doing little to warm the chill creeping into your bones. The pig is restless. You hear it shifting in its little corner pen, snorting and snuffling. You wonder if it's reacting to something outside or something under the floorboards. Rats. Of course. You saw one yesterday, bold as you please, dragging a turnip chunk across the room. You threw a shoe at it and missed. The shoe hasn't been seen since. You shake out your bedding, old straw stuffed into coarse fabric, and something small and many-legged scuttles away. You pretend you didn't see it. That's the medieval way. Now comes the nightly routine. Lying perfectly still and hoping your blanket covers enough of your feet to keep the rats from nibbling them. It's not paranoia, it's precedent. A boy down the lane lost a toe last winter. Rats. They're bold when the fire dies, and they can smell the scent of your supper on your breath. And then there's the scratching. In the thatch, in the walls, sometimes on the door. Could be a fox, could be something else. A woman 2 huts down insists she saw a shadowy figure walking the fields every night for a week. She tried to tell the priest. He told her to stop drinking nettle wine. Sleep comes in fits. You're just dozing off when a sudden clang jolts you awake. Your cooking pot fell, or was knocked. You rise slowly, heart pounding, pick it up, and mutter a few prayers. You sit by the hearth and stare into the embers. They glow like little red eyes. You're cold. You're tired. You can't sleep. Again. Let's talk about lighting. You've got a rushlight, sure. Basically a greasy reed that spits out dim light and a lot of smoke. Candles made from beeswax are too expensive. Tallow candles, made from animal fat, are cheaper, but they smell like someone set a butcher's apron on fire. So you squint through the gloom, trying to ignore your racing thoughts and the occasional sound that's definitely not the pig. Historians still argue whether medieval nights were truly as terrifying as they sound, or whether we just romanticize the past through a modern horror lens. But the written records, full of nightmares, demons, shadows, creatures that creep. Night air was feared almost as much as sin. It wasn't just a time of darkness, it was a time of unseen dangers. Quirky fact? Some people would sleep with iron under their pillow to ward off evil spirits. Others carved crosses into the walls or kept a knife near their bed, not for protection against thieves, but against witches. In some regions, garlic was hung from rafters, not just for flavor, but to keep the devil at bay. Not that you can afford garlic. At one point, you doze off again. This time, your dream is oddly vivid. A priest with a goose's head offers you a turnip and says something about judgment. You wake up disoriented, cold, and unsure whether it was just a dream or a vision. You glance at the door, still shut. You're not the only one awake. Somewhere nearby, a baby cries. A man coughs. The world doesn't stop moving just because it's dark. It just moves more strangely. And finally, sometime around what feels like the middle of the night, you begin your second sleep. But even then, the straw pokes your spine, and you know that you'll wake up with your muscles clenched and your jaw aching from stress. Your last conscious thought before sleep overtakes you. Please don't let the roof collapse. Because yes, that happened last week to old Leofric. Right in the middle of a storm. One moment praying, the next, under 3 tons of soggy thatch. They say his ghost still sneezes in the ruins. So you curl up tighter, pull the scratchy wool blanket over your ears, and pretend the scratching in the corner is just the wind. Good night. Sort of. The rooster crows before dawn. Again. Loud. Repetitive. Annoying. You fantasize about chicken stew for half a second before you remember that meat is a luxury, and that same rooster might be your only alarm clock for the foreseeable future. You sit up slowly. You ache in places you didn't know could ache. Your straw bedding smells worse than you do, and yet, you're alive. That alone feels like an accomplishment. But here's the bad news. Something's off with the bread. You reach for your morning crust and notice it's spotted. Dark flecks. A weird purple tint. It smells funny too. Sweet, but wrong. You eat it anyway, because you're hungry, and because in the medieval world, bad bread is still bread. What you don't know is that you've just had a helping of ergot, a toxic fungus that grows on rye. It flourishes in damp conditions and, oh yes, your entire grain store has been damp for weeks. Ergot is a sly killer. It doesn't strike instantly. It waits. Starts with numb fingers, twitching muscles, then the headaches, the visions, the seizures, the vomiting, the very real possibility of death. Quirky fact: ergot poisoning is considered one of the leading causes of historical mass hallucinations. Some even suspect it played a role in the dancing plagues of the 16th century, where entire villages danced uncontrollably for days and died doing it. So now you sit, chewing your strange tasting breakfast, wondering why your fingers feel a little tingly and the light looks sort of greenish. You shake it off. There's work to do. But your luck isn't done testing you. You head outside and find the well has gone dry. Again. A neighbor mutters about cursed water spirits. Someone blames the local widow. She gave that look again. A boy starts crying because his only boots were stolen in the night. The sky darkens, and you realize a storm is coming. The kind that floods the fields and tears roofs off houses like paper. And then, as if on cue, someone collapses in the street. It's the tanner, face pale, eyes sunken, sweating, buboes under his arm. You know what this is. Everyone knows. You take a step back. Then two. Someone whispers the pestilence. People scatter. The air feels thicker now, more dangerous. The market empties. A bell rings. That sound again, the one you hoped you'd never hear. The death knell. Historians still argue whether outbreaks like this were spread more by poor hygiene or trade routes. But in the moment, there's no room for debate. There's only fear. The priest arrives, swinging a censer full of herbs. You don't know whether it's doing anything except making the air harder to breathe. You rush back home, slam the door, and wedge a bench against it. You hold your breath and think, I only had a bite of that bread. But it's too late for most precautions. You've lived your whole life surrounded by risk, rats, starvation, cold, festering wounds, bad bread, infected water, religious fanatics, and the general misfortune of being born in a time where everything seems to be trying to kill you. You think back to all the things you've survived, the lice, the cesspits, the punishments, the spirits, the starvation, the scold's bridle, the night rats, and now, maybe this bread. You sigh. Maybe you'll get lucky and just fall asleep tonight, never wake up, and be remembered kindly as someone who made a really great oat gruel. Or maybe you'll survive, again, and wake up tomorrow with your joints aching, your roof leaking, and the pig trying to chew your hair. Either way, your chances of making it past your 35th birthday? Slim. But hey, you're tougher than you look. You survived this long. So now, listener, let your mind drift slowly from the clamor and chaos of medieval life. Picture yourself wrapping that rough wool blanket a little tighter around your shoulders, feeling the warmth of the dying hearth, fire at your feet. Outside, the storm has passed. The rats are, for once, quiet. The rooster's gone to sleep. The wind is still. You made it through another day in a world that seems determined to chew you up and spit you out. You endured the hunger, the smells, the endless noise, and the sheer confusion of a society run on fear, superstition, and a deep mistrust of anything remotely convenient. Let that hard straw pillow cradle your head. Let the low flicker of the rushlight play across your eyelids. Softer now, slower. The aches of the day soften too. You're not walking anymore. You're not working. You're simply breathing, one quiet, careful breath at a time. And though the world outside is filthy, loud, and terrifying, in this moment, right here, it's just you. Safe, warmish, alive. Maybe tomorrow you'll dodge another bout of bad bread. Maybe the tax collector will forget your hut exists. Maybe the tanner was just tired and not plague-ridden. Or maybe not. But for now, you can rest. Close your eyes. You've earned it.